Hi everyone. You are catching us in the middle of a laugh because why not? We're a couple of minutes after 5 for a good reason that you will enjoy, which is that Charlie has something special for us at the end of this conversation. Maybe we're going to make it happen. I'm going to make it happen. So it is all for a good cause. Stay with us. You'll see why. If you're watching live, put in your questions in the comments so that I can ask your questions to Charlie directly. But hi, I'm Geraldine Anello for Theater Music Directors, and I am here today. My special guest is Charlie Alterman. Hey, Charlie.
Woo! How's it going, everybody?
So I'm happy quarantine. Woo! I am so excited to have you here because I'm pretty sure I first encountered your work with, as we all know, because I geek on it all the time, your version of Fathers and Sons on YouTube. Way before I moved to New York City, I had stumbled upon it one day, and I think I sat there listening to it on repeat for about 3 hours.
Oh my God.
And regularly since then over my life, I'm like, I have to listen to this song sang by Charlie Alterman right now. So first of all,
thank you.
I just absolutely was obsessed with that. Then when I moved to the city was when you were doing Pippin. And I came to see the show and I watched you from the balcony. And so I had a direct line of vision to you. And I wrote you after that an email that can only best be described as fan mail, which I did try to find for this occasion. But Alice, maybe good for me, I could not find. So I think
I'm going to go searching for it and then we'll post it. We'll edit it first.
And so that's really special. And at Pippin, that's the other last bit of this. I sat in with Sonny Palladino. And the very first note I have ever played on Broadway was at Pippin because he had one note in that score that he let the people who watched maybe play. And he was like, do you want to hold this? And I was like, yes. And I came home that night and I was like, I played on Broadway tonight, the one night.
Oh God, I love that.
All of that to say, I have like this giant heart when I think of Charlie Alterman. So thank you for being here.
I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy to have something to do. Come on. Quarantine time.
And everyone's
going a little crazy.
I hear you had your quarantine start a little bit early.
Yeah, I was supposed to be doing a show in Houston right now, which I want to believe this is a record of all of these crazy COVID stories. It was canceled while I was in the air. It was like the Monday that everything was going into lockdown here, but Houston seemed like it was behind the curve or whatever you want to call it. So all weekend long, I was texting them. I was like, are we still happening? Like, and Sunday night I was packing, and while I was packing, my phone went, and it was a little New York Times alert saying CDC now recommends no gatherings of more than 50 people for the next 30 days. So I immediately texted the associate producer, who's a friend of mine, and I was like, I should stop packing, right? And God bless them, though, they were trying to keep us employed. It was a new show that, we all knew needed some work. So they were like, maybe we'll still get through it. And then while I was in the air, the mayor held a press conference and said, we're shutting down the city for 2 weeks. So they had to send me right back home. It was so sad. But long story short, too late. I was staying home for like 2 or 3 weeks right before all of this started because I was writing out all the charts. They're Nashville songwriters who are awesome, but they don't write anything down. So it was me transcribing things off of demos and working with them. And it was awesome. But I was like, for 2-3 weeks, I was only leaving my house once a day to go to the gym and get food. So I was basically living that quarantine life. So I was like, the same way that Italy's been kind of like, we're 2 weeks into your medical future. I'm like, I'm 2-3 weeks into your mental health future. And it's not bad. It's not pretty.
It's looking good from looking at you. You're making it look okay.
Well, I'm finding ways to cope. I've like moved to the acceptance phase. You know what I mean?
First comes grief, denial, anger.
Yeah. There's actually a great article floating around. I can try and post it that talks about how what the anxiety we're going through now is actually grief. And if you can name it as that and realize that there'll be stages of it and that eventually the goal is to get to the acceptance. Anyway, I'll philosophize another time, but I
love a good philosophy.
It's really great, actually, and it really helped me.
Charlie Alterman, the Broadway conductor and philosopher.
Listen,
we need a Broadway philosopher. We don't have one. Let's get started on that. So all of you watching, if you don't know who Charlie Alterman is yet, Charlie is the music director of Pippin on Broadway, Godspell, Next to Normal, also the music director of the tour of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and also the music director of the Muni, which is, I believe, the largest theater in the United States.
11,000 seats. I'm one of their music directors. They have many music directors, but yeah, I love working there.
You're a regular. You've done, like 10 shows for them?
Yeah. It's pretty crazy. I almost resisted it the first time that they tried to hire me a bunch of years ago because I was like, this is crazy. We're going to put up a show this massive and this scale in like 11, I think you have like 12 days of rehearsal or something. I mean, it's so cuckoo. And it's massive. Everything's epic. Like you have to double every scene change music because people have 5 miles to run on from the wings, you know? But then I got there and I was like, everyone's operating at such a high level and it's so much fun that I became hooked and addicted, and I'm obsessed with Mike Isaacson, who runs the place. I just think he's the best. So now I work there any chance that I get. And I have to say there is something cool about turning around to take your bow and being like, hello, 11,000 people. Like this, you know, it's like, I call it musical theater at the ballpark.
Yeah, rock star life.
It looks like you're at a baseball stadium and just like only facing one little section of it, you know?
Oh my gosh. So what are your tricks to making it happen in 11 days?
Panic and no. Honestly, it's I think just, you know, someone said to me when I was first I was like, this can't work, and they were like, talk to some music directors who've worked here before. And I talked to Sam Davis, and he gave me a great piece of advice. He said, for the Muni, you just have to turn off your perfectionist gene. That I think when you're working on Broadway and you have the time and you have the resources and you're like, it has to be perfect, it has to be perfect, it has to be perfect. You want to dig deep and get it perfect. And at the Muni, it's kind of like, okay, it's 11,000 people. They're eating popcorn. They're drinking margaritas. Like, you want it to be good, and it will be good because everyone's insanely talented who works there and they take it seriously and they're prepared. But at the end of the day, all you can do is your best, you know? And there was some real freedom in realizing that. The other thing, this is going to sound so silly, but one thing I think I love about working at the Muni is that you want it to be good. It almost always, every show I've done there, I have been proud of because we've had an amazing cast, an amazing creative team, and everyone's operating on their game and at such a high level. But at the end of the day, you know, you do a show on Broadway and you're like, it's got to be great so we get good reviews so we run. Or if you're doing a show out of town, it's like, it's got to be good so we transfer to Broadway. And at the Muni, it's like, you want it to be good, but whether it's good or terrible, you're going to do your 7 shows and then you're going to go home. So there's like a different level, that added level of pressure is off. And oddly, out of that, you end up doing better work because you're not obsessing. You're just being free and being creative. It's again, here I am philosophizing, but it's actually been like freeing for me in my other work to realize, oh, when I don't obsess, I can actually get just as good results. Why am I panicking all the time about all things and nitpicking? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, talking about Broadway then, and the difference with both, we have some specific questions about pretty much all the shows you've done.
Amazing.
That's it.
I'm so excited.
So, question number 1 by Jake. He wants to know, what was the development of the piano conductor score from the piano vocal for Next to Normal? How much were Tom Kitt and Michael Starobin each involved in the arrangements?
Ooh, that's a really good question. They were both actually very involved. And I'm going to kind of answer it, but I also should preface this by saying I did not do the show second stage, which is where a lot of that was first developed. That was the amazing Mary Mitchell Campbell. I came on board after that. They kind of went back out of town. Well, they'd never been out of town, but they went out of town to Arena Stage because after second stage, everyone kind of agreed, even myself having seen it, never knowing I'd get a chance to work on it, that it needed work. But like the stuff that was good was so monumentally good that like this can't be the end of the line. And then she was unavailable because she was doing Roadshow, the Stephen Sondheim show down at the Public. So I came in DC. So a lot of that had already been fleshed out. But my understanding of it, Tom did all of the arrangements and orchestrations when it was at Nymph, and a lot of those stayed in the show. And then Michael Starobin kind of built on those for the songs that remained throughout. And then ultimately, by the time we were adding songs for Arena and adding songs for Broadway, I think Tom was so swamped that it was like mostly Michael Starobin, but Tom was like, I think, in very heavy discussions with him about what the rhythm section stuff would be doing. I think in general, and this is a very rough estimate, I think Tom was more responsible for the rhythm section stuff and Michael was more responsible for the strings and like the non-drum kit percussion, like the vibes and Glock and all that kind of stuff. But they both had hands in both. And then I got in there, and by the time we opened on Broadway and I realized we were a hit and we were going to keep going, I was like, okay, there are a lot of places where this piano conductor and this piano vocal don't match. So I went through the like monumental task of going through and saying, okay, here's a place where actually the lead thing is now this thing, so let me fly that into the rehearsal piano book. Or Michael actually transformed the rehearsal piano part a little bit into the show piano part, so why don't we just get that in the rehearsal book so pianists aren't going crazy learning 2 different versions of it. So I tried to streamline all of that, but that was a monumental task, especially because at the time I didn't really know what I was doing in finale. Not that I'm going to say I'm an expert now, but you know, at the time I was like, I'm going to figure it out as I go. So that was a lot, but and longest answer to the simplest question, but there we go. We'll be here for 45 minutes, everyone. I hope everyone's ready.
I have talked to people who subbed for you at Next to Normal, and what they were saying was that it was a really difficult show to conduct day to day because it changed a lot depending on, because it was all about the mental state. The mental state of the actor performing that role on a daily would lead to different tempos and lots of rubato. And I've talked to them about it, but I would love to hear you, who's conducted it the most over the years. Like, what was your experience with that?
It was intense. I will say it was probably the most gratifying, artistically satisfying thing I've ever done, but it was also unquestionably the hardest thing I've ever done. First of all, the show itself is wall-to-wall music. So you never have a chance, just even noting the show, and the subs would go on a lot, partly because the way the band was structured, there wasn't an associate, so they weren't around every day to sort of learn those little subtle morphs and shifts that were happening. Because the show is all told through song, and in the same way that a scene won't be quite the same from night to night because the actors are feeling a little differently, all those scenes are then happening in song. So it meant the songs had to be ever so slightly different night to night. You couldn't be like, all right, we're clicking it and it's going to go here, because they were all, I mean, some things you probably could have, but like some of the rock songs that really just stayed in a groove. But a lot of the stuff, if the scene took a turn, I had to turn with them, which was really exciting, because I always joked I was like the seventh cast member or something, because in my mind, to conduct that show, you really have to be in the scene with them and play the. I mean, that's always the case as a conductor, but especially on that show. But it was hard because things would morph and change, and people would come in and be like, that seemed faster tonight, or that seemed slower. And I'm like, oh yeah, by the way. So, and I try and stay on top of telling them, but there was so much material. And then I never had a chance to write anything down because there were no scenes. There were no pauses. So I'd try and like throw a Post-it note in my score. And then at the end of the night, I'd be like, what was that about? I can't even remember. But again, here I am philosophizing again. The interesting epiphany I had in that show, and it was in the course of training subs, I was kind of coaching them through what it means to get through that show. And I realized, I think often when we do shows, you end up spending a lot of time recovering from a song and going, oh, that thing that just happened, and beating yourself up about it, or saying, wow, that was so great, I want to do it like that again tomorrow. And then anticipating, especially if you're a sub and it's your first time, and you're going, oh God, that nerve-wracking, terrifying line is coming up in 3 songs and I can't stop thinking about it. And I was like, you literally don't have a half a second to let those thoughts enter your brain, because if you do, you'll miss something, because it's so nonstop. I was like, the only way to get through the show is to live in the present. And if something happened in the past, it's in the past, forget it the second it happened. If something's in the future, you'll deal with it when you get to it. You have to just be present. And that was the only way I could get through the show. But in a perverse way, it actually became life-changing, because I was like, wait, I can live my life this way, and I'm so much happier. So that was like a profound moment for me, realizing that all came out of just the insanity of that score. But it was crazy. And because we didn't have a traditional associate who was like playing key 2 or something like that, I was like, how do we keep these subs in the mix so it's not so like earth-shattering for them and for the cast when they go on? So what we came up with, like the sort of standard on Broadway-ish, is that the conductor will swing out once a week to take notes. But I was swinging out, I think, 6 times a month. They kind of upped it to that, partly to keep the subs in the mix, and partly because I literally couldn't take notes during the show. And, I would swing out to take notes on the Charlie tour, and that show was pretty locked and loaded, and most of the things were clicked, and the cast was really consistent and stuff. So like by the end, I'd like sit there with my notepad and be like, I wrote down 2 things. Next to Normal, every show, even a year and a half in, I'd be like, here we go, boom, 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 just like fanning out. Okay. And I mean, I like drove the actors crazy too, but it was like, there was just so much stuff. And I was also constantly nitpicking with people about diction and stuff, because the whole story was told through song. So if you missed a word, it was like pivotal. So it was intense, but it was also really satisfying.
We have a question.
10 p.m.
No, this is great. It's such useful information. We have a question here from Alexander. Hi, Alexander. Alexander says, can you speak to the differences between working on a new show versus a revival, even revivals as reimagined as Godspell and Pippin? Also, hi. Hope you're staying safe.
Yes, I am very safe. I'm 90% sure that I already had COVID-19 last month, but like the mildest case. So I'm really excited for the antibody test to find out for real, but it's kind of making me feel a little less panicked about everything. But anyway, there are a lot of differences, but there are a lot of similarities too. I think the biggest difference is whether or not the composer is going to be involved. If it's a new show, you're always working very closely with the composer, which is something that I love. And I loved working with Tom Kidd on Next to Normal. I loved working with Mark Shaman on. I did a show called Fame Becomes Me with Martin Short that was hilarious. And I've done some other new shows out of town. And to me, that's a really exciting part of the process because you can glean everything. You know, you can just get inside the composer's brain. I feel like all of us have done productions regionally or in colleges, and you're just like, I wonder what they were thinking there. And it's like, I'll ask them. You know what I mean? Or they're usually in the room to say, actually, I was thinking this, do this. So that's really satisfying. Although in a way, I feel like those reimagined revivals I did, like Godspell and Pippin, it's nice to sort of treat them like a new work. Although in that case, we were also had the luxury that Stephen Schwartz really was around. And I have to say, I constantly feel blessed by that collaboration because I would always say he was around the perfect amount. He was very available. He would definitely weigh in. He was not shy about opinions when he would come to check up on things, but he also wasn't hovering. He was kind of like, I'm very close to this material for years, but I'm interested in it being reimagined. I'm interested in seeing what you guys bring to the table. So I'm going to kind of leave you alone so that you're free to come up with whatever you come up with. And I'll check in every week or two and just see where you're at and be like, oh, that blew my mind. I don't like that. So it was great. And he's so clear and direct and doesn't mince words. So it's like that. I love working with him. But it was interesting. They're very different shows as well, even though the musical tone is sort of similar. But Pippin, I feel like the biggest thing, the songs themselves, and we talked about this a lot with Diane Paulus, who was so great about like the pulse of what the audience really wanted coming into it. She's like, people have such nostalgia for like that album. I don't know about you guys. I listened to that album constantly as a kid. And she was like, people have nostalgia about it, even down to the specifics of like keyboard patches. She was like, that synth at the beginning of Morning Glow, like we can't change that. That's iconic. You know what I mean? So that one, we weren't really trying to reimagine the music, but the big challenge there was reinterpolating all of the circus stuff into it. So it was coming up with all this new underscoring and coming up with all these new routines to extend dance numbers to have circus stuff, which that was a whole other really thrilling thing, getting to get an eye in that world. Just watching those acrobats work, I'm like, I'm never complaining about anything again. We're always like, Broadway's hard. And then I'm like, wow, this is actually hard what they're doing. And they're not complaining about it at all. We're like, we have to come in early. They're like, can we come in early? Because we want to train. We want, it was inspiring. Anyway.
Here's another question about Pippin from someone. We do not see your name, so I'm sorry, I'm not going to say it. It just says Facebook user on my end. But the question is from someone who is planning a production of Pippin this summer with the Long Island Musical Theater Festival. And the question is, I see that Revival is scored as a piano conductor book. I am in a position where I have the option of stick conducting. What are your thoughts on stick conducting versus piano conducting when you have the option?
Oh, this is a really good question. Personally, I actually prefer to stick conduct. It depends on the production. Like people sort of made fun of me because I did Hairspray at the Muni and I chose to stick conduct it. They're like, you stick conducted that? I was like, listen, people, the stage is 40 feet wide in each street. You know how like the numbers on Broadway go to like 15, 20 on either side? I was like, they go to 40 on either side. And I was like, we get 2 rehearsals with the drummer. I was like, I feel like I can do more by being in there with the band, but like particularly like to not have drums for a show like that in rehearsal. So I'm like, it's better if I'm in his face waving a stick around. And I actually love the feeling of stick conducting, but it depends on the show. Like a show like Godspell would be ridiculous to stick conduct. It's basically a rock band and you can conduct with or Next to Normal, like you kind of conduct with your hands on the keyboard as opposed to your hands in the air. Pippin, I would say, could go really either way. I actually enjoyed piano conducting that one, and I think you might enjoy it too, just because the piano part is so satisfying, and so many of those songs are piano-based, and it's not really a difficult show to keep together from the keyboard. It a little bit was on Broadway just because we had this cuckoo setup where I couldn't see the band. They were in a smaller theater they wanted, so they didn't remove the cover over the pit orchestra, so they took like 5 seats out for me, and I could see the stage, but I couldn't see anyone in the band. It was the weirdest, most disconnected thing. But the show itself, you're kind of like 3, 4, here we go. And then the song just stays, or if it's rubato, Larry Hochman was brilliant in the way he designed that piano conductor score to be intelligent, that anytime there was a push-pull rubato section, I was either leading it on the keyboard. So it was very easy for people to just follow me with their ears, or he kept me totally free to conduct it with my hands. So that particular show, I would say, go for it on the piano conductor. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory on tour, I wanted to stab my eyes out every day that I wasn't able to stick conduct it because it was so hard. Because that was full of like cinematic underscoring and tempo changes and key changes and all this stuff, and it was pickup orchestras, and I was like, I need my hands free, and it was so much left hand conducting that I ended up getting tennis elbow. I mean, it's a whole long story, but it was a very happy experience. I don't want to make it sound like it was not a good time, but that was hard. That was definitely hard.
We have a question from Evan who says,
Yeah.
do you practice critical listening when you're not in rehearsals or performances, and if so, how?
I don't know what critical listening meaning what, actually?
Evan, let us know what you
mean. If you're watching live, tell us what you mean. If you mean like noting a show, I feel like it's not something I practice, but it is something that is kind of just how my brain works. In a way that's a blessing and a curse. I think it's a blessing because when I'm actually being a music director, it's like I can quickly say like, oh, we got to do, I can hear things and fix them and whatever. It's hard because it's hard for me to just like go see a show that I'm not working on because I'm in the audience like, oh, they should have changed the key on this. Oh God, what's she doing there? We got to work with the alto. You know what I mean? It's like, it's hard to shut it down, but
Evan confirmed that you did answer his questions. So nailed it. And we have another question from another Facebook user whose name we cannot see on our end. But the question is, when working on a revival, how much do you like to defer to the original as a point of reference versus putting it aside and treating the revival as a new production?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think the answer is you have to do both. And I think especially like with Pippin, I was saying, you know, there's so much nostalgia for the original, but the great thing that Larry Hochman said, which I agree with, is he was like, we don't need to change things for the sake of changing them. He said the fact that, you know, what was it, 2015, 2013, I forget the year, but he was like, the fact that you're playing this and that all these musicians are playing this in 2013, that I'm orchestrating it in 2013, even if in our minds we're just replicating the original, it will be different. And it's funny, there's so many songs that in my mind I've listened to 1,000 times and I'll sit down and play them and I'm just like mimicking the cast album. And then I go back and listen to the cast album and I'm like, whoa, that was totally different. So that was sort of the approach on Pippin. The approach on Godspell was that those songs were written and designed to sound like they were something that was on the radio at the time. And so we felt like the goal in that case to do the show again was to have it sound like something that could be on the radio now. So again, we weren't necessarily changing it up just for the sake of changing it, but we were definitely looking to like explicitly do new arrangements on those. And I have to say, Stephen Schwartz was so into it. He was kind of like, I love that because it's different and it's reimagined. Michael Holland, who's a genius, who did those arrangements and vocal arrangements. He also was so smart about it. One of my favorite things is we were like, what do you do with Turn Back, Oh Man? Because it's meant as a throwback number. It's not meant as a current song, but it's this Mae West thing. And he was like, people don't even really know who Mae West is now. Or I mean, some people, I know I do, but you know, younger people don't really know that reference. So he actually looked at the timeline and he was like, okay, when the show was written versus Mae West, let's now say current period, go back the same number of years. It kind of put us in the 60s. So he was like, what if we did like a Shirley Bassey 007 kind of feel on it? And that's how he came up with the whole idea for that Turn Back, Oh Man arrangement. So that it was still a throwback, but it was like an equivalent throwback, which I thought was really cool. Other things, like when I've done regional revivals of stuff, it's kind of harder to reimagine, partly because you don't know if you'll have the rights to reimagine it because the composer may not be involved, and also just because logistically you probably don't have a budget for orchestrators, arrangers, copyists, etc. So I usually end up doing them more out of the box. But again, it's that thing I was talking about with Pippin, where just the sensibility of what the new actors bring to it in terms of how they interpret the performances and the lyrics, and I guess what I bring to the table in terms of tempo and how I infuse it with a scene and whatever, will give it an update, even if it's not an explicit intentional update. You know, sometimes setting out to do the original, you realize that you've made some kind of cool updates.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question from Jared, who says, what was the easiest and the hardest part about recording in the studio for Godspell?
Ooh. I would say the answer to both questions is that we did the band and the cast separately. And that's becoming a trend because partly it allows you to focus on both, but also just the economics of it. You're basically paid by your time in the studio, so it minimizes the amount of time that any individual person, other than I guess me and the writers and the producers, are in the studio. But what was great about it is it allowed us to like really focus on the band and really get the band exactly dialed in and tuned in, and then really just focus on the cast and the vocals and all that. Although I will say specifically to Godspell, the hardest thing was that we did the first day, which I think which was the band day, the day after we opened. So we were all hungover, but we pushed through it, and for that show, it was actually great because pretty much everything was clicked anyway, except Beautiful City, which because it was just piano, we were able to do live, and also the cast session was in a different studio that had this gorgeous Steinway, so that was like heaven on earth, getting to do that song with Hunter in that studio. And I was such a cheeseball, but it was at the end of the day, and we were so exhausted because we were kind of like doing the math of who was in what and what do we, and we were just kind of like, all right, and then everyone else will go home and we'll just finish with Beautiful City. So we were so tired, and I was like, but I also want this to be good, and I'm trying to get in the mood, and it's like the most hideous lighting. I was like, can we dim these lights? Can we, you know what I mean? I'm like, can I just have a moment of zen? So and it's hysterical because that's the video that kind of went viral. And every time I watch it, I'm like, I just look stoned. I look like I'm so stoned. But in a weird way, I think it made the performances better because we were so just like wiped out. We were like, let's just do this. And like, we were so open-hearted by that point because we didn't have the energy left to like, should I have done that quicker? Should I have, you know what I mean? It was just like completely open without judgment. And it was, I think it hopefully read in the performance.
Last question is from Catherine, who says, as the music director for these shows, do you work more with the actors and then carrying over your way it sounds to the orchestra? Is that kind of a separate deal? The bigger the production, I find this is less all the music director deal. For example, with a school show, it's really all the music director. Just wondering.
Well, I feel like it always starts with the cast just because literally logistically, you always start rehearsing with the cast. Even on the huge shows on Broadway, oddly, you almost get less time with the musicians because it's like to the penny. Do you know what I mean? If you're doing a high school show, it depends who's in the orchestra. If you're hiring ringers, obviously, then time is money. If it's students, then you're like, okay, the labor is free, but ooh, we got to spend some time on this. You know what I mean? But on Broadway, it's like, okay, great, you're gonna get, or the Muni especially, it's like you get like 2-3 hour sessions, and then suddenly you're like, oh great, 11,000 people are watching this. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but you get like a read through for 3 hours, a sits probe, and then like a tech rehearsal. It's crazy. And then hello, 11,000 of my closest friends. But although they're used to it, they do 8 shows a summer. Most of them play at the Fox when the tours come through. So I'm like, we're gonna do this in 3 hours, and then I'm just like, oh, that was perfect. Next song. That was perfect. Next song. Anyway, but I think in a way it all sort of does have to come from the cast because that's ultimately what the audience is coming to see is the performances, which is not to say the band isn't important, but I feel like everything that comes out of the pit orchestra has to be in service of what's happening on stage. And to me, that's what's exciting about it because I feel like as the music director, you're the conduit between those two worlds. So it's about connecting to the performance and connecting to the band and finding a way to translate that storytelling in your body and in your words, like kind of, for me physically, it's like channeling the energy that's on stage and then serving that energy into the orchestra so that they feel a connection to the stage. And they can understand what the storytelling is and what the emotion is and what, so I'm not afraid to like jump around when things are, cooking or to like really get lost in it if it's something more serious. Even though I'm probably look like a fool most of the time, but I don't really care. But I also think just technically it's about understanding. A friend of mine said once that I thought was so perfect that he was like, being a music director is like being an English to English translator who can speak to actors in language that they understand, musicians in language that they understand, copyists in language they understand, sound designers in language that they understand, directors, choreographers, etc., which I thought was a really great way to put it, that to accomplish the same thing, you have to talk about something with an actor in the moment and the storytelling, which might translate to the musicians as saying, we got to just crescendo on this note. Although I personally take the approach of trying to talk storytelling with musicians too. Early on, mentors of mine sort of eased me away from that because they're like, they don't care. They just want to like, do you need it louder? Do you need it this? But I think a lot of musicians really are artists and really are, don't want to just play their instrument. Everyone, they're all artists. That sounded crazy. You know what I mean? But really think of it the best ones really do think of it in terms of the storytelling. And as soon as you say to them, this is about a moment of anxiety and whatever, they're like, oh, now I know how to play it. I'm like, versus saying, oh, can you do that tremolo faster? They're like, I can. But then as soon as you say like, she's agitated, it's the thing in her mind spiraling out of control. They're like, got it. You know what I mean? So anyway.
Well, as a stand-up for this live, would you please play a little bit of something for us, for example, fathers and sons. I don't know why that just came into my mind.
Oh God. All right. Let me see if I can bring you over to the piano. Hi, welcome to my bedroom, which is also my piano room. I have to preface this by saying I'm super self-conscious because I can never get through the song without crying, and I wasn't planning on doing it, and I have no idea what the sound is like. So here are 700 disclaimers for you. I don't
You
even know
are
if I
welcome to
remember
just
the
do a verse and a
words,
chorus. You do not have to do the whole thing.
which is good because I might forget the lyrics. And
La,
now I'm
la, la,
so
la,
ridiculous. I'm
la.
trying to get a better background, but that's going to make me sit at a weird angle. Oh God, sorry neighbors. Here we go. Also, I haven't warmed up, so here we go. We'll see. Hey! Heard a lot of songs say, where are you going, my son? Now I know they're true. Boy, you never stop to think how fast the years run. Now they've taken you. Good morning. I remember you were 3.5. Your mom and me, we'd sit there after things got quieted. We'd laugh at some new word you said, how tough you were to get to bed, and we'd plan the night away, planning for our kid. I was your hero then. I couldn't do no wrong as far as you were concerned. You thought I was the best of men. The tables hadn't turned, you hadn't learned how little time it takes. And daddies make mistakes. Seems to me that lately I've been thinking a lot. I think about my dad. Lots of funny things come back I thought I'd forgot. Now they make me sad. High school that it used to be, I didn't want him touching me, and I'd shudder if he did. But further back to summer nights, baseball games beneath the lights, and sleeping in the car, a daddy and his kid. He was my hero then. Couldn't do no wrong as far as I was concerned. I thought he was the wisest and the strongest and the best of men. The tables hadn't turned, I hadn't learned how little time it takes. And everybody breaks. Daddies make mistakes. I heard a lot of songs say, where are you going, my son? Now I know they're for real. Boy, you never stop to think how fast the years run, or the things they steal. Now it seems I always knew why I do the things I do and the things I never did. Why I worked my whole damn life so I could give a better life than the one my dad could give me. I'd give it to my hey kid. Why didn't I warm up? I didn't know we were gonna do this.
Oh my gosh, I'm not crying. You all are crying. Oh, that was such a gift. Thank you so much. My heart is filled. You have no idea. My heart is just like warm and happy and full thanks to this song.
I have this
thanked by you right now.
I know we're already going over, but I did that. I was like at a summer program in Bennington when I was in high school, and I did that song for like the final presentation recital. And in my mind, I was just like, it's a pretty song, and I wasn't really thinking about the lyrics because I was young and I didn't know what I was doing. I was just like singing my heart out, and my family was all there, and I come out to the audience, and they're all like sobbing, and I was like, what? And I think that's why now I just can't get through it without that. But it's still such a good song. When we did it at the Godspell Sing Schwartz concert, Hunter Parrish was going to fly back because he had left the show by that point and sing that song, and then he just couldn't with his shooting schedule, and we were like, but we have to still put that song in. So like I was like, we'll got to figure it out, and we're like, everyone in the cast is so young, and I was like, maybe I should do it. So that's how that all came about.
Well, thank you so much for doing it. It really meant a lot to me.
Oh my God.
For sure. Thank you for being here, everyone.
Thanks for coming out, everyone.
Coaching, so you can reach him on Facebook. Shoot him a message if you want to take a lesson with him. Charlie, thank you for this. Everyone, we have a Finale 101 section that starts this Monday. Sign up if you haven't already. And yes,
thank you, Geraldine, for keeping us so busy during this time. Every day I'm so bored, and I'm like, oh, there's something happening on the music.
Thank you for that. Thank you again for doing this with us. We love you. Bye, Charlie.
Bye, everyone.